The judge's voice was the quietest thing in that courtroom, and somehow it was the only thing I could hear. Counsel, your client's position is that the deceased held a familial obligation to the plaintiff despite having no legal or biological relationship whatsoever. My stepfather's lawyer straightened his tie. He was expensive looking. The kind of expensive that comes with a gold watch you don't check because you already know what time it is. That is correct, Your Honor. The judge looked down at his papers for a long moment. Then he looked up at me, not at the lawyer beside me, at me, and I think I saw something move across his face. Not pity, something closer to recognition. I was 31 years old, sitting in a courtroom in Mississauga, Ontario, being sued by the two people who had left me at a Greyhound station in Thunder Bay when I was 9. They wanted $2.4 million. That's where the story ends up. Let me tell you where it starts. I remember the smell of that station more than anything. Diesel and floor wax, and someone's Tim Hortons double-double going cold on a plastic bench. My mother had my hand and then she didn't. My father, I still called him that then, told me to sit on the bench by the lockers and wait. He said they were going to get the tickets sorted. He said it would only take a minute. I was 9, I believed him. I sat on that bench for 4 hours. I know it was 4 hours because there was a clock on the wall above the departures board, one of those old analog ones with a red second hand, and I watched it for so long that the numbers started looking like a foreign language. Somewhere around the second hour, I stopped believing they were coming back. Somewhere around the third, I started talking to a woman who worked at the snack counter. Her name was Shirley, and she had a granddaughter my age, and she kept giving me little packets of crackers from under the counter and not charging me for them. It was Shirley who called the station manager. It was the station manager who called the police. It was the police officer, a young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, nervous in a way that made me feel like I needed to be calm for his sake, who took me to the OPP detachment and sat with me while I told him everything I knew. My full name, my address in Thunder Bay, my school, my teacher's name, Mrs. Pollock. I even remembered the phone number, the landline, because my mother had made me memorize it the previous spring when we'd had a scare about me walking home alone. I gave them everything. I was 9, not helpless. The officer typed it all into his computer. He got me a hot chocolate from the machine in the hallway. He told me someone would call my parents right away. What happened next took me 20 years to fully understand. My parents had already filed a missing child report. Not that night. They filed it the next morning, claiming I had wandered away from a rest stop on the highway outside of town. They said I'd been having behavioral problems. They said they'd searched for hours. The report painted me as a troubled child who had run off, and it was detailed enough, and my parents were calm enough when they told it, that it took the authorities longer than it should have to connect the dots between a missing child report out of Thunder Bay and a found child in the same city's bus terminal. By the time anyone thought to cross-reference properly, my parents had left the province. Child Services placed me in emergency foster care. A temporary placement, they said, just until the situation was sorted. But situations have a way of becoming permanent when nobody's looking, and the family they placed me with in Sudbury, a woman named Diane and her husband Ron, who were kind but overwhelmed with 4 kids already, was always going to be a bridge, not a destination. It was at the Children's Aid Society office in Sudbury, 8 months later, where I met the man who changed my life. His name was Gerald. He was 62 years old, recently retired from 30 years as a high school geography teacher, and he came into the SAS office every other Tuesday to volunteer as a homework helper for kids who were waiting for placements. He wore the same kind of plaid flannel shirt every single time I saw him, just in different colors, and he had reading glasses he was always losing and finding again in his shirt pocket. The first time he sat down across from me, I was trying to do a worksheet on the provinces and territories that I'd already finished but was doing again because I had nothing else to do. He looked at it and said, "You got the capital of Manitoba wrong." I looked at my paper. I hadn't. He looked again. Fair enough. That was it. That was the whole first conversation. But he came back the next Tuesday and the one after that, and somewhere around the 4th or 5th visit he asked me if I'd ever played cribbage. I said I didn't know what that was. He said he'd teach me. He pulled a battered wooden board out of his jacket pocket, like he'd been carrying it around on the off chance someone would ask. He taught me the names of all the hands. He never made me feel stupid for forgetting them. He would just show me again. I don't know exactly. He started asking the caseworkers about me. I only found out later that he had been quietly, persistently asking about my situation for several months before anything official happened. He was 62, he was single, he lived alone in a 3-bedroom house outside of Sudbury that had once held a family that was gone now, a marriage that hadn't worked out, 2 kids who were grown and had their own lives, a lot of rooms that weren't being used. The Sass had concerns. Of course they did. A single older man wanting to foster a 9-year-old girl. I understand why they had concerns. He answered every question. He attended every home study. He provided references from colleagues, from his church, from neighbors who had known him for decades. He passed every background check so thoroughly that the caseworker told Diane, who told me years later, that she'd never seen paperwork so clean. He became my foster father on a gray November afternoon when I was 10 years old, and I moved into his house on a Tuesday so I could be there for cribbage night. Life with Gerald was quiet. That was the thing I noticed first, not in a sad way. Quiet like a library where the quiet means something is happening, not that nothing is. He cooked every night, real food, not impressive food. Things like chicken soup from scratch and macaroni with actual cheese sauce and apple crisp on Sunday nights because he liked the way it made the house smell. He drove me to school in a red pickup truck that was slightly too old to be embarrassing. He came to every school event I was ever part of, including a deeply unfortunate recorder concert in grade 5 that no other parent survived all the way to the end of. He never pushed me to call him anything in particular. I tried Mr. Gerald for a while, which he found genuinely funny. I tried just his first name. Eventually, without deciding to, I started calling him Dad. He never made a thing of it, he just answered. He adopted me legally when I was 13. It was a Tuesday. I finished high school in Sudbury. I went to Laurentian for 2 years, then transferred to U of T to finish my degree in social work. I came home every Thanksgiving and every Christmas without exception. Gerald learned to text, badly and with enormous earnestness, sending me things like, "Hope your day is cold here," "Made the soup," "Love Dad," which I still have screenshots of, all of them. I was 27 when he was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. I moved back to Sudbury for the last year and a half of his life, and we played cribbage almost every evening, and I let him win sometimes, and he knew I was letting him win, and we never talked about it. He died on a Wednesday morning in March, which felt wrong because Gerald was a Tuesday kind of person. He was 74. He was the best man I have ever known. His lawyer called me 3 weeks after the funeral. Gerald had updated his will 6 months before he died, which his lawyer said was not unusual for someone who had received his diagnosis. He had left me his house, his savings, and a small investment portfolio that had done considerably better than either of us had known, because Gerald was not someone who talked about money, ever, at all. The total was $2.4 million. I sat in that lawyer's office for a long time after she told me. I thought about a red pickup truck. I thought about apple crisp. I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in a Cass office and a man who pulled a cribbage board out of his jacket pocket. I was still sitting with all of that when, 5 months later, my biological parents found me. I still don't know exactly how. Social media, maybe, or public records. The adoption had been sealed, but there are ways, and they'd clearly had some help. A letter arrived at my old Sudbury address, forwarded to me in Toronto, where I'd gone back to work after settling the estate. It was written on nice paper, the kind of nice that's trying too hard, and it said that my parents had been searching for me for years, that they had never stopped thinking about me, that there had been a terrible misunderstanding when I was young. I read the letter twice. Then I put it in a kitchen drawer and tried to forget about it. 2 months later, I received notice that I was being sued. The claim was something I had to read 4 times before it made any sense, and even then it didn't really make sense. My biological parents were arguing that as my legal guardians at the time of my childhood, they maintained a legitimate familial interest in any estate I inherited as a direct result of that period of my life. They were also claiming that Gerald, by adopting me, had effectively intervened in what should have been a family reunification, and that I had been emotionally and financially damaged by being separated from my biological family, and that they deserved compensation for the loss of a family relationship. They were suing me for $2.4 million, the entire inheritance. I called a lawyer. She was a woman I'd met through work, a family law specialist based in Toronto, with a quiet, methodical way of talking through problems that I found steadying. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "They're going to have real difficulty establishing standing," she said. "What does that mean, in plain English?" It means they're going to have a hard time convincing a judge they have any legal right to sue you at all. You're a 31-year-old adult. The adoption was finalized when you were 13. Their parental rights were terminated at that time. They have no legal relationship to you, no legal claim on your finances, and no connection whatsoever to Gerald or his estate. So they can't win. They can try. People try things in court they shouldn't try all the time, especially when there's a lot of money involved. The concern is that even a case like this can cost you significantly in legal fees if it drags out. She paused. But I want you to understand something. The claim about Gerald interfering in family reunification, that's not gonna fly. There was never a reunification attempt. There's no record of them ever trying to recover custody of you after you were placed with Cass. Not one filing, not one inquiry. I had not known that. I had assumed, somewhere in the back of my mind, that they had tried and been prevented. Learning that they had simply not tried at all was a different kind of thing to sit with. There's something else you should know, my lawyer said. The original missing child report. The one they filed when you were 9. What about it? It was filed with information that was inconsistent with the facts, specifically the claim that you wandered away from a highway rest stop. The bus station security footage from that day, if it still exists, which is uncertain after this many years, but we can request a search, would presumably show a different story. And there is also the matter of the insurance claim they filed. I didn't know about an insurance claim. My lawyer explained it to me patiently. When a child goes missing in Canada, some home insurance policies and specific supplemental coverage plans include provisions for certain expenses, search costs, emergency accommodations, and in some extended policies, limited financial support for families of missing children during investigation periods. My parents had filed such a claim. They had received just under $18,000. They had received money for losing me, for leaving me. I called my lawyer back the next morning and told her I wanted to explore whether a counterclaim was possible. She said she'd look into it. The case did not move quickly. Cases like this rarely do. There were months of motions and filings and postponements, and I will not pretend that it didn't affect me, because it did. There were nights I couldn't sleep. There were weeks when I woke up, and the first thing I felt was a kind of low-grade dread that didn't lift until I got to work and had something to focus on. My therapist, who I had been seeing on and off since university, suggested I journal. I tried. Mostly I played cribbage against a phone app and thought about Gerald, and tried to remember that the outcome of a legal case was not the same thing as the truth of my own life. My parents' lawyer sent several letters suggesting we might want to consider an out-of-court settlement. Each one made the proposed settlement amount slightly smaller than the last, which my lawyer said was a reliable indicator of how confident they were actually feeling. There was one moment, about 6 months in, that I want to tell you about because it mattered more than almost anything else. I was in Sudbury for a weekend, staying at Gerald's house, my house now, though it still felt like his, and I was going through a box of papers his lawyer had set aside as potentially relevant to the estate. Old documents, receipts, letters. And at the bottom of the box, in a manila envelope with my name written on it in Gerald's handwriting, I found something I hadn't known existed. It was a letter, written to me, dated about 7 months before he died. I am going to paraphrase what it said because it was private, and it was his and some things you keep. But the part I want to share is this. He had known, he wrote, that money could complicate things. He had known that leaving me what he was leaving me might draw people out of the woodwork who hadn't been there when it mattered. He had spoken to his lawyer about it. He had done what he could to make the will unambiguous and the estate documentation thorough. But he also knew there were things legal documents couldn't do. What he wanted me to know, he wrote, was that he had chosen to find me in that Sayus office not because he was lonely, though he was, and not because he had something to prove. He had chosen to find me because he had a house that was too quiet, and enough Tuesday afternoons left in his life to fill it with something good, and he had looked at me across a worksheet I'd already finished and thought, this kid is going to be all right, she just needs someone to show up. He said he was glad he showed up. I read the letter 3 times, and then I sat on the floor of his living room for a while, and I wasn't sad exactly. I was something that doesn't have a clean word in English. Full, maybe, like a room where all the furniture finally makes sense. The court date came in early spring. I drove up from Toronto the night before and stayed in a hotel downtown because I couldn't face sleeping in Gerald's house that night, not for this. My lawyer met me in the lobby at 7:30, and we walked over together, and she was wearing a very practical gray coat and did not make small talk, which I appreciated. In the courtroom, my biological parents sat across from me and looked exactly like strangers, which they were. My mother had dyed her hair. My father was heavier. I had not seen them in 22 years, and looking at them now, I felt nothing like rage and nothing like grief. I felt something smaller and more specific. I thought about a plastic bench by a set of lockers. I thought about a clock with a red second hand. I thought about crackers in a little packet and a woman named Shirley who gave them to me from under a counter and didn't charge me for them. The preliminary hearing did not last long. My biological parents' lawyer presented the claim about familial interest and Gerald's alleged interference. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses that reminded me, painfully, of Gerald, listened without expression. Then she said, "Counsel, can you walk me through the basis for your client's standing to contest this will?" And the lawyer started talking, and the more he talked, the quieter the room got. The judge asked about the termination of parental rights. She asked about the absence of any record of attempted reunification. She asked about the timeline between my placement in care and my parents' departure from the province. She asked about the insurance claim. That last question made my parents' lawyer pause in a way that was very telling. The judge did not rule on the spot. She took it under advisement, and we waited 3 weeks, which were among the longer 3 weeks of my life. I went back to Toronto. I went back to work. I called my lawyer every few days, and she said each time that she would call me when she'd do something. She called me on a Tuesday. The court had dismissed the claim. The judge found that my biological parents had no standing to contest Gerald's will and no cognizable legal basis for their claim of familial interest, given the completed adoption and the termination of their parental rights more than 18 years prior. The ruling specifically noted the lack of any documented reunification effort in the interim years. The counterclaim was not resolved in the same proceeding, but my lawyer said we were well positioned. I did not go to a bar. I did not call anyone to celebrate. I made myself dinner, chicken soup, from scratch, the way Gerald had taught me, and I ate it at his kitchen table in Sudbury, in the house that was mine now, and I listened to the kind of quiet that means something is happening. The insurance counterclaim was eventually settled outside of court. I won't say the number. What I will say is that some of it went toward a fund I set up at the Laurentian University School of Social Work, in Gerald's name, to support field placement students who are working with children in care. Gerald would have found that very sensible. He was always sensible about things that mattered. I still live in Toronto. I still play cribbage, badly, against the phone app. I drive up to Sudbury every few months and stay at the house and make apple crisp on Sunday nights because of the way it makes the house smell. I still have the cribbage board, the battered wooden one, with the worn-down holes and the pegs he kept in a little cloth bag that had probably once held something else entirely. It sits on the windowsill in my apartment above the fire escape, and sometimes in the evening the light catches it, in a way that makes me think of a gray Tuesday afternoon, and a man who pulled it out of his jacket pocket on the off chance someone might want to learn. If the people who were supposed to love you walked away, and then came back only when there was something to take. I don't have advice for you. I only have the thing I know from sitting in that courtroom, and the thing I knew before that, from sitting on a bench by a set of lockers at 9 years old, learning the particular weight of being left. The people who stay are the ones who were actually there. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they show up on a Tuesday.